So you did my work for me. Now I don't have to introduce what I'm reading. Thank you. So I'm going to be reading 3 sections from passages. The first one, Unknown, Irina Polanski, Patrick Reagan, Ben Brenner. The bone of an eye socket is peeking from the sand. I have nowhere to be anyway. There is nowhere, no one. So I crouch, untie the cloth from my head, and use it to sweep the sand from the skull. Then there is spine too, and all the way uncovered, there is an entire body laid out, the scrunch of a child in its arms. There were ways to determine the gender of a skeleton, but I do not know them, and so they do not exist. The skeleton is mostly emptiness, mostly space between bone, just as speech is mostly silence. Perhaps this is a way to decrease the solitude, redefining quiet as a pause in conversation. The bones are warm from the sun. I touch where the ligaments have been worn away by sand. The skeleton is Irina Polanski, my supervisor, who had tried so hard to be with child, but the first few had become blood and the body's muck before she could know them. She shouted at us for moving tables without her permission, for putting things on the tables she did not want there, for making choices she would not have made. After her first child, she gentled some. She brought the boy into work and took him from floor to floor. I left the job when he was a few months old. I found out later that there was something wrong with him, that he was imperfect in some way. Anyway, all she had wanted was a child, so what else would she hold? The skeleton is Patrick Reagan. He had been an old man at 20 and was a goofy sort of handsome. It would be Patrick, not his wife, not Julia. Julia moved without resistance. Patrick found her, she found her career. The most difficult part of her pregnancy was frequent urination, and her labor was brief. They named their child an old-fashioned name and fell immediately into the habit of family holiday cards. One of these cards, a photograph, had been hanging on my refrigerator, but it had lost its corners over the years, then its edges, until all that was left was the dust held together only by the magnet still clinging to the door. The skeleton is Ben Brenner, who spoke to me like we had once been something intimate, who lived in the far reaches of the north and who distanced himself from technology. His was the first baby I had known who was not family and was not a stranger. The bones are growing warmer. It is becoming the part of the day when it is too hot to be awake. I lie next to the remains, sleep until I am woken by the wind. Second section. Adiba Talukder. I see her from a distance, Adiba Talukder. She is standing by what had once been termed school bus, its doors rusted open. When the wind passes, I am closer. With her finger, she is carving her name in an ancient script into the thick dust of the bus's leeward side. We know buses now as shelter. We had first met as children waiting for such a bus in front of a store that sold fruit and other luxuries, became friends discussing the merits of soups. She always wore purple then. Now all cloth has faded to gray or dirtied to brown. Adiba Talukder has visions. They are written into all nearby surfaces, stone walls, fallen fences, sand, in words that soon no one will be able to read and that will not remain. I reach the bus. I live in 2 worlds, here and the other one, she is writing. When she looks up, she knows who I am. It has been 100 years. What is the other one? I ask her. There is dust in my mouth like there is dust in the bus. My tongue has withered from disuse. As I speak, dust falls to the sand. She wears a scrap of cloth over her hair, more a memory than a hijab, and her glasses are cracked. We speak of when she had been concerned enough about appearance to leave her face unadorned by what she considered useful but unflattering. I say, "You could not read street signs. You were always lost. In truth, you were always lost anyway." I am silent a moment, then, as if she has asked me to continue, I add, You told me there was a beauty in seeing the world blurred. You could not see anyone when they waved. Do you remember, she says, when I was disappointed by the moon? I say to her, it was smaller than it was when you could not see. I think of how she had been hundreds of years ago, fragile even then. She is an old woman now. Her brown skin has darkened to animal hide from the sun, but still she is beautiful. Her body has found grace even in decrepitude. She has highlighted with ash the eyes she had once rimmed with coal, her only nod toward vanity. I too am an old woman. I am more aware of my bones now. If anyone were to ask, I would provide time with a new definition, but there are few to speak to. Other than insects and the occasional lizard, Adiba Talukder is the only being I have seen in months. After the visions, she is never tired. I sit on the steps of the school bus and touch the rubber treads long worn smooth by the wind and sand. She walks the length of the bus and then back again. We had sat beside each other on school buses many years ago. Once, we stepped off the bus and I bought her flavored ice from a truck. Once, we sat in her room and looked at an egg opened into a bowl. Her mother brought us sweets on a tray. I was the first of my kind to make my way into that home. We had spent much of our youth together. To the revolution, she used to say. Her speech had once included sounds I could not pronounce, but now the sound of our words meets somewhere between. Time has worn away the edges of language. Soon the sky will turn to night, and night will settle to the earth. She squats by the school bus door. Remember when there were children, she says, when for them at least age was something to be desired? Now it is an excess and embarrassment of whatever that phrase once had been. She rises to fight the chill that night brings to what has now become the desert. Sands will continue to rise like tides, she writes, as we mourn what makes them grow. I stay until the moon comes. We watch the strange shapes the night takes. When I leave, she is writing, and what of dark? Did it not once soothe us to sleep? I, of course, in the dark, cannot be certain that this is what she is writing. Still, I know her well, and this is something she would say. Last section, Beth Nelson. I had not spoken to Beth Nelson for decades, had not spoken to her even before the change, and now she can barely speak. She loses bits of words, the sharper sounds rasped to nothing. The sand has gotten to her voice along with everything else. Beth Nelson had been much louder than me, but now she is smaller in every way. She has buried most of herself beneath the sand, and what of her I can barely see. I squat next to her. The sand is cooler down here, she says. She is leaning against a smaller dune still in the process of forming. The tatters of her skin flutter with the wind. Gusts tug pieces from her arms, and her hair separates from her scalp at the lightest touch. She is allowing herself into bone. Beth Nelson had been shaped by a long undiscovered food allergy and a complicated family. Once, reacting to her mother, she put her hand through a wall. Once, we sat on her trampoline and it was covered with leaves. Once, we sat on her back porch knowing everything about each other. Her cat had been such a small creature. Beth took care of herself, was the first of us to become an adult. She was the first to drive. She graduated college a year early, worked 2 miserable jobs before we had worked 1. She met Scott, a man as intolerant of lactose and gluten as she was. Beth and Scott lived in an area that the rest of the city made fun of, but their apartment was cheap and large. They owned a guinea pig that danced to pop songs, and the squeaks he emitted each time his owners returned were suggestive of an otherworldly, intelligent form of life. The guinea pig would be dead now. Animals do not seem to last the same way humans do. Beth and I have the luxury of catching up, of discussing the past in order to reach the present, rather than to set the present aside. The conversation does not last long. Our pasts are distant enough now that they have become easy to summarize, not to mention the difficulty I have understanding the remnants of her voice. Scott is at best a synopsis. His glasses, baseball cap, gone. What else had happened since? The loss of her mother from their family, something mumbled about a move, their wedding by a mountain, rich wood, a peaked ceiling, autumn. I watched sand collect in the crook of her elbow. The relief granted me by conversation with her, even a conversation as abbreviated as this one, is surprising. Apparently, despite all that has happened since we lost touch, this too had been weighing on me. Eventually, her voice becomes only breath. The sand has begun to cover her forearm, but she does not shake it loose. "It's just easier," are the last 3 words I could hear her speak. I watch until the sand reaches her upper arm, then remove my right shoe and use it to shovel sand onto the parts of her that are still exposed. When I lift the shoe, sand trickles from the hole above the toes, and the bottom too is wearing thin, but still it is more efficient than using my hands. I cover her shoulders, her chest, then her neck, pat the sand down. I use the shoe to cover her chin, her ears. For the mouth, though, for that I use my hands. Thank you.